the Madman! Welcome to the star ratings for the newest expansion. This is the Death Knight edition, so I'm covering all the Death Knight cards from March of the Lich King, the core set, and the Path of Arthas. I got some good news for those of you who want to try the new Death Knight class. It seems like whichever rune type you choose, you're gonna have a pretty good deck, if my predictions are correct. Let's get started with my pet favorite deck, Blood Rune Death Knight. I think triple blood is the only way you build this deck because you really want the 3 blood rune cards in this deck. By virtue of being tier 2, it means that the top rating that I can give for pretty much everything here is 4 stars. With one exception, we begin with Patchwork. 5 stars! The absolute monstrosity. Patchwork actually is a card that is so good that the other Death Knights may consider splashing 1 blood rune just to run Patchwork, and maybe a few other friends. Extreme disruption in a mode where you do really want to eat certain things. Obviously Denetrius. There's a surprise edition, Svolna. If you can somehow eat with Patchwork before Svolna comes out, that seems unlikely, but there's a few cards that enable OTKs. Vixalis. You can eat their eating, you can eat their Mutinous, their Theotar, and of course, their Patchwork. Anyways, even better than Mutinous because it also impacts the board immediately, and you get 2 chances at eating, because you not only aim at 1 card in their hand, you might even randomly hit the card that's really important in their deck. Next, we've got the cards that I consider are going to be core to Blood Rune Death Knight. So all of these get 4 stars. We got the 3 Blood Rune cards, which are really strong, Vampiric Blood and Soul Stealer. These are so good that you'll want to run duplicates of these. And by the way, I think the Blood deck, as a control deck, as a long attrition deck, you should run it Renethal. Vampiric Blood is just super good, 2 mana, gain 10, and draw a card. Like, wow, that's really good. And obviously 8 mana Twisting Nether, and get a 5/5, and get a bunch of corpses. That's really good. Past that though, the 2 Blood Rune cards are all really core to this as well, and you definitely want 2 copies of each, in my opinion. Hematurge, Corpse Explosion, Blood Boil. These are all really high power cards. With Hematurge, you can discover any of the other cards that are ranked 4 stars, or even Patchwork. Wow. Blood Boil is extremely strong. It's not only Consecration, it eventually turns into 4 damage Consecration over 2 turns, and the turn that you cast your Consecration, you're also gaining like 6, 8, 10, 12 health? That's only the first time it activates. The second time, you're gonna suck some more blood and kill some more things, hopefully. That's a really, really key card, and when I was running this deck with, you know, Highlander, Reno, I wasn't running 2 copies of both, and those are really good cards that you want 2 copies. And Corpse Explosion, there's not that many ways to spend corpses in blood. So you end up with a bunch of corpses, and Corpse Explosion ends up being like a 5 mana clear. And early on, when the health totals on the board aren't that high, Corpse Explosion can also serve as a small AoE. And over at the 1 rune section, like, some of the really good cards are here as well. You got Bone Guard Commander, 8 mana to like protect yourself completely with a board full of taunts, and you're gonna have all those corpses by then. You got Gnome Muncher, which is a really good stabilizing tool, which also immediately gains you life, and probably gains you even more life, and has taunt, and kills a guy. And you got Heartstrike, which is my pick over the Noxious Cadaver, as the card you want to run. I think of this Blood Death Knight deck as more reactive. You never want to play Noxious Cadaver early if you're not hitting a minion, so I figure you might as well just run Heartstrike instead. Now we go on to the 3-star cards, which are cards that you, I think, will not always see in the Blood Death Knight core list. Let's start with the 3-rune card of Alexandros Mograine. All of these are 3 stars. Alexandros Mograine is a 7 mana 7/7. That is a War Golem. It doesn't even do anything really. The turn it comes in, it deals like 3 damage, whatever. The point of Alexandros is great card if we're in a meta where there's actually very slow control decks in there. Which is to say, if Blood Death Knights are all the rage, you will need Alexander of Mograine in order to win the mirror match. Because you're both going into fatigue, but if you have dealt an extra 45 damage with Mograine, you're going to be a little bit further ahead. The 2 Blood Rune cards, we got Deathbringer Sourfang. I am myself a big fan of this card, and I think I'm pushing this card past what people are like ranking this as 1 star. I'm willing to admit it's not core, but it's way better than people think it is. Yes, you inefficiently play a 5-mana 3/5 once, but after that, you get to keep playing your 0-mana 3/5 taunt. And it moves 5 health from your hero just to like a minion with taunt. So the taunt is basically taking the damage that you would have taken. You might save some health because they don't always have the perfect 5 health solution to it. It's got taunt, so usually any damage dealt to it would have been dealt to you as well. You just get to also deal damage to minions. Just great card in my opinion. If I weren't pressured by the internet and being laughed at for rating this so high, I probably would have rated it a 4 myself. But hey, I can get peer pressured too. We got Asphyxiate as a really premium 3-mana removal. Just possibly won't see both copies in a deck. Maybe not even 1 copy in the case that it's a control-heavy environment. You don't need all this removal, but I'm thinking of running 2 Asphyxiate in my deck. I think it's just really good removal. Over on the 1 Ruin section, we got Deathstrike also at 3 stars because, you know, at some point you just have too much removal in your deck. Deathstrike might be overdoing it the more aggro there is, especially decks with a medium amount of like medium weight minions. Deathstrike is a really good answer if you're dealing with 4, 5, or 6 health minions. Over in 2-star land, we got the mighty Corrupted Ashbringer. This is very similar to Deathstrike in that you might not need all this removal. Corrupted Ashbringer is better if you're thinking about running the weapons in your deck and perhaps the weapons search. There is some chance for a Rune Forging, Frostmourne, Corrupted Ashbringer, Soulbreaker package of some sort. Speaking of Soulbreaker, we got Soulbreaker here as well. Do you need a Fiery War Axe in this deck? Which comes with a small benefit. Maybe, I don't really think you do, which is why this is rated at 2 stars alongside the Corrupted Ashbringer. Obliterate I think is just worse Asphyxiate. And Darkfallen Neophyte I think is a card that Unholy decks might splash for, but they mainly did it for Patchwork, and they mainly did it for Noxious Cadaver, and they maybe did it for No Muncher. Darkfallen Neophyte, maybe. And then over at 1 star, we got the losers, we got Blood Tap, we got Vicious Bloodworm, both cards that are hand buffs, and I just don't really see a deck that wants this. So yeah, there's the blood cards. They're pretty cool. It's super my style of play. It's very Control Warrior-esque. You literally just sit there and wait a few turns, and by a few I mean a lot of turns, as Alexandros Mograine slowly deals 40 damage to them. Next up, we got the Frost Death Knight, and this section is going to have so many 5-star cards, because this is a tier 1 deck in my opinion, and that is led by the 5-star cards, the triple Frost Ruin requirement, and I do believe that if you're playing Frost Death Knight, you are going to play 3 Frost Ruins, because you want these 3 cards in your deck. Frostwyrm's Fury. Holy cow, what an insane card. This card actually carries this archetype. For 7 mana, you're essentially dealing 10, but often more than 10. Because you immediately do the 5 to the face, you freeze the opponent's board so they can't interact with the 5/5 you summoned. But if you have any other minions on the board, when you cast the Frostwyrm's Fury, you're going to be able to attack those with those minions next turn against a lot of different decks. And you save yourself all the health. Frostwyrm's Fury is going to cause so much fury when you copy it with Lady Death Whisper. Lady Death Whisper lets you copy all your frost spells, and that allows you to do some crazy combos with Horn of Winter. It allows you to do some pretty unfair things with Frostwyrm's Fury. Because one of the most furious things that I'm sure people are going to complain about is going to be, oh man, my opponent cost Frostworm's Fury on turn 7, or 6 with a coin, and then followed it up with another Frostworm's Fury, and then they played another Frostworm's Fury. You know what? How much damage you're chaining with that if you cast 3 Frostworm's Fury? The number may astound you, because it's not the 3 times 5, that's 15 damage, but the first dragon from Frostworm's Fury gets to deal 15 damage while the board is frozen. The second Frostworm's Fury dragon deals 10 damage, and the third one deals 5 damage, which is an astounding 45 damage off of 3 spells. Do you think that's not enough? Well, you can throw in Marrow Manipulator, which is a 6 mana 5/5, which just Pyroblasts the opponent, and or helps clear the board as well. So just a useful board control and opponent's face control card. So yeah, the 3 Frost Rune cards are very, very powerful. You want them in your Frost deck. So you can't even consider running 2 Frost 1 Blood or 2 Frost 1 Unholy. Over in the 2 rune requirement slot, you got Overseer Frigidara, just a really, really strong card. Draws you 2 Consecrations the opponent. Good stats for the cost. One small requirement is if you put Frigidara in your deck, you do need to roll in only Frost spells, but that's not a problem. You were going to do that anyways. Harbinger of Winter and Frost Strike are both just cards that fit into your Frost deck and do good stuff to stall your opponent, get you the cards you need. It's great. Death Chiller is here to keep you alive in the early game. You play the Death Chiller, maybe in some more aggro matchups, you play Death Chiller, you Horn of Winter, you play a Frost Strike, you deal a bunch of damage to minions, you stay alive, maybe Death Chiller stays alive, you get to cast another bunch of spells the next turn. All of this is just strong baseline Frost Death Knight stuff. With the Horn of Winter, if you copy of Frigidara, you're able to have a 14 mana turn late game. That could be something like Bran Bronzebeard, Horn, Denathrius. It could be Bran, Horn, Astalor. And then in the 1 ruin area, you just got so many solid cards. You got Bonebreaker, which is a 1 mana weapon that deals 8 damage. You deal 4 to minions, 4 to face. You got Defrost, a 2 mana draw 2. You got Howling Blast, a 1 mana deal 4. You got Glacial Advance, a 3 mana mini swipe. You got Thessarian, which is just so many deal 2s in 1 4 mana body, very efficient. You got the Consecration plus draw a card and Remorseless Winner. So many all-star cards here. And that's so many cards that I do believe this deck is a Renathal deck, because you could use the 10 extra health, and there are a lot of good. Look at all these 5-star cards. There are a lot of good cards to put in here. Like some of the cards that are 4 stars, I even consider core to this deck as well, but I'm just not as certain on them. You got Might of Menethil. I do believe that you have more than enough corpses to go around for your Marrow Manipulator and your Defrost. And I don't think Might of Menethil necessarily takes that many corpses. You could even play it when the opponent just has 1 big minion, just takes 1 corpse to freeze it. Gives you a lot more time, but Might of Menethil stalls the opponent, deals 8 damage, it's good. Rhyme Sculptor gets you more corpses, it is a lot like Dr. Boom, just costs 5 mana instead. The stats are lower, but it's still great. It adds in a bunch of corpses. We don't even have any 3-star cards here. I just think that, all the Frost cards are that good. We got a few 2-star cards. Rainfang Sword is going to be a card that you do consider in your Frost Death Knight build. Ultimately, the weapon will cost 0 once you get your mana savings on your cards, but I just ultimately don't think that this deck needs that. It's just not quite good enough. I think Might of Menethil is a superior weapon. I got Acolyte of Death, which I think Unholy is going to strongly want to splash Frost for Acolyte of Death, and for Thessarian, Remorseless Winner, Defrost, Bonebreaker. I think that's a really real option for Unholy. But ultimately, I actually think 3 Unholy is the better build. Also on 2-star, we have Ymirjar Frostbreaker, which if you're going to play a little bit more of a standard tempo mage style, Ymirjar Frostbreaker would be a lot like the Mana Worm of old, where you play it early, you follow it up with your Flame Walker, but actually it's not a Flame Walker, it's a Death Chiller. And then you cast a bunch of freezing spells while you're attacking them with early chip damage. I could see that type of deck. But I don't see it just as being as good as the decks without Ymir Jar Frostbreaker, but we'll see. It should be tried out. Over at 1 star, you have Repulsive Gargantuan. It's repulsive. It's bad. So yeah, Frost Death Knight. I think it's going to be a real competitor. And it's going to get some real whining attached to it. And it's going to be so much whining that I think Frostwyrm's Fury has a very real chance of being nerfed. Next up, we got the Unholy Death Knight. In my opinion, 3 Unholy is the best setup for Death Knight, but I am willing to humor. Whereas like 3 Frost was really obvious and 3 Blood I think is mostly obvious. I think you could make an argument for 2 Unholy, 1 Frost, and 2 Unholy, 1 Blood. Those all seem like reasonable builds to me. Well, we got some 3 rune cards here. These are all 4-star cards because I do think that Unholy is a tier 2 deck ultimately. But we start with Plagued Grain, which is a wonderful turn 1 play. You play the Plagued Grain on turn 1, it gives you the possibility of following it up with the Battlefield Necromancer on turn 2. Plagued Grain is another reason why you may want to go 30 card decks, so that you can more consistently get your zombies. That's a lot of potential zombie power. Lord Merogar is a card that you really want in Unholy because you're going to have a lot of corpse generation with all of your reborn minions and all of your multi-summon minions. Big finisher. And then you have Grave Strength, which is better in the more aggressive Unholy decks because it is a Bloodlust for 4 mana, permanent Bloodlust. In the more mid-range decks, you might not run 2 copies of Grave Strength in your deck, maybe just 1. Similar to how you don't necessarily want 2 Bloodlust in your deck, maybe just 1. Unholy has a lot of powerful 2 rune requirement cards as well. Like all of these are, joining in the 4-star area. Battlefield Necromancer with the potential to snowball from turn 2. They might not even be able to kill the Necromancer because you keep having taunting undead in the way. Necrotic Mortician, this is just quite strong. There's a lot of good cards to discover here. The Necrotic Mortician makes you want to run a few more 1-mana undead cards in your deck. And that also leans towards having a smaller 30-card deck so you can more consistently start off with the turn 1 undead into the turn 2 Necrotic Mortician. Tomb Guardians, super powerful, really annoying, and really just solid play at 4 mana. Army of the Dead, similar reasons, really solid play on 5 mana. Use up all those corpses you've generated early to spend 5 mana to summon 10/10 worth of Rush. Stitch Giant, combos with Army of the Dead, combos with a number of the other cards. 0 mana 8/8 is actually online surprisingly fast. In the 1 ruin section, you got Bone Digger Geist. It's another card that you really want to have started off with a card on 1 mana on. Good, strong 2 mana 3/4. Plague Strike, really strong, efficient removal option. The classic kill a guy, make a guy. It's like Flanking Strike, but it only costs 2 mana instead of 4. Graveyard Shift, so much stickiness. Generates corpses, generates a little bit of damage you can throw anywhere you want. And you got Blight Fang, which sometimes just slays the opponent because they have a lot of minions on the board. You play the Blight Fang, you infest everything, you eventually kill those, you eventually make a bunch of value for yourself. So a lot of strong board combat focused cards here, and that's really what makes this Unholy Death Knight deck work, in my opinion. On the 2-star side, you've got cards I don't necessarily think fit into this plan. You have the Scourge on the high end, 9 mana. Will you even make it to 9 mana? If you do make it to 9 mana, is this the card you actually want to be playing? Debatable, but it is a legendary. You wouldn't. It's not the end of the world if you play this in your deck. You've also got Meat Grinder and Possessifier, which are both actually looks like pretty strong options for Death Knight. I just think that the other options are better, and there might not be enough deck space in your 30-card Unholy deck to add these 2 in. The Meat Grinder also has the downside of possibly killing off your Lord Merogar. Hate to see that happen. You might not need that many corpses as well, which is the reason you may not need the Meat Grinder and the Possessifier. You already generate so many corpses. Over at 1 star, You just got the cards that I didn't necessarily think were good enough, like your Mirrorjar Deathbringer. It's a corpse spender, and you would like more corpse spenders, but this Deathbringer is not a good corpse spender. You've got 3 mana +1/+1 and anti-magic shell. I just don't see any world where that's good enough. Dark Transformation, I think this doesn't fit this deck. 4 mana, assuming you hit your hero power for a 4/5 rush, whatever. Unholy Frenzy, too specific, I think, to see play. Nubian Swarm Guard, you'd want to play this with the buff cards, perhaps when paired with Blood, but I just don't see that actually being good. Let's finish up with the neutrals in Death Knight. Sitting on the top at 5 stars at neutral, no rune requirements, Chill Fallen Baron. This card is a 2-of in every single Death Knight deck. 3 mana, 2/2, draw 2 cards. Like a lot of the Death Knight classes, actually I think all of them, even Frost, they could use a bit more card draw. And this is the card that like is so good for them. It's 3 mana, draw 2, and get a 2/2. Like, it's great. Body Bagger, also a very strong card. You definitely run that in Unholy, and you may run that in Blood if you feel like you need more early game. This card is perhaps one of the best starts as Unholy because it counts as both a turn 1 undead and it counts as a turn 1 corpse, which you can make use of on turn 2. Over on 3-star land, we got Skeletal Sidekick, which is a great card if you are running the more aggressive Unholy Undead deck. For any deck, which mostly has to do with Unholy again, that does need to spend more corpses, the Corpse Bride is a way to dump a lot of corpses very fast. I could even see this possibly in Blood Death Knight, just because Blood Death Knights go a long time and they generate a lot of corpses. Corpse Bride is a lot of stats if you have all those corpses. Ultimately, I don't think it'll actually be the case, but it's one you should consider. Over on 2 stars, we actually got kind of a mini combo here. We got Rune Forging, we got Frostmourne. I think Death Knights are not going to be well known for their weapons, at least initially. The weapons all look kind of tame, which is why Rune Forging, which does look like a pretty good card, is not necessarily that strong. It's not fetching that many strong weapons, in my opinion. Frostmourne is a powerful weapon, but it is so slow. 7 mana for a 5 attack weapon, and then 3 turns later, it like gets to summon a bunch of stuff on your turn. Like, I'm a Blood Death Knight, and I love slow cards with big effects. And even I look at Frostmourne and I'm like, oh, I don't know if this is realistic. Over at 1 star, we got Icy Touch. I think only Frost would consider it, and it's not enough of an impact for Frost. And we have Malignant Horror, which is actually a card that I did consider similar to Corpse Bride. If I needed more corpses, you could throw them into the Malignant Horror. I think the first step is the Corpse Bride, and you look at the Malignant Horror afterwards, and it turns out, I don't really care about Malignant Horror that much. But what a expansion! We got a new class with 3 major archetypes supported, all of which play very differently. And in my opinion, one of those archetypes is going to be tier 1 Frost. And I think 2 of those archetypes have a very fighting chance at tier 2 and maybe even potentially tier 1. Blood and Unholy.